Says. Tell me
Green here coming out of other areas.
yeah, they say it's good.
Do I look
All
at
right.
you, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
great.
no, you look at the camera.
Do you want me to look at the camera? Really?
Good morning. They're here at Call to Action Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm joined by National Catholic Reporter columnist, thank you, Jamie Manson, who is with us this weekend in Albuquerque for the conference. Jamie,
Yes.
you're here again for the Call to Action Conference.
Yes.
Why do you come?
Hi, Bob. I come because of the energy, the prophetic spirit, the sense of family. And I thought the timing could not be better. You know, usually we meet right before the election.
Yeah.
This was excellent timing because it is just good to be in a community that has taken action for so many years, you know, that is so committed to justice. It could not have been better timing in terms of needing a sense of comfort and a sense of strength and a sense of encouraging one another.
That's an ironic sort of thing because I remember in 2008 we met the weekend after Obama was elected. There was euphoria
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
In 2010 we met the weekend after the Republicans took back the House, and it was a sense of downer.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
a different sense this weekend. I mean, obviously everybody is just shocked and wanting to know what to do to go forward, but there's a determination that seems to be alive. I think it may come to the fact of we're not going to change who we are.
That's right.
We've worked for justice all our lives.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and sometimes, you know, upheaval and turmoil and a sense of everyone being marginalized is one of the best things that can happen to the human spirit. It can galvanize us in a way that, you know, times of, you know, that we've had, you know, under President Obama, there has still been continuing injustices, but we've had a sense of we're okay, things are being taken care of, maybe a sense of complacency set in, and we don't have that anymore. And I think that maybe we need this to ignite us and really mobilize and organize. You know, conservative groups are so good at mobilizing and organizing because they're such absolutist groups.
Yeah.
And they have a sense of being under siege. And sometimes having a sense of being under siege can be very, very good, I think. You know, and I'd like to see more of it happen among the Catholic faithful. I mean, I've not been shy about my opinion about Pope Francis. I think sometimes we fall into a complacency with him, with a sense that he's going to take care of us and it's okay. And we know, you know, we still have the same problems with women, with LGBT issues. We still have the same injustices. So I'm hoping, you know, this can be a time to galvanize and organize and mobilize in ways that we have needed for a while now.
One of the questions that keeps coming up is how do we feed ourselves personally? How do we make sure that we don't give up on the struggle? You got any advice?
Yeah, I think that there has to be a place for self-care, you know, and for laughter still. You know, I can be the last couple of days I have felt very tempted to fall into despair, to not be able to laugh because there is such a heaviness. I wake up every morning with a heaviness on my chest, like there's like something tragic has happened. And I think we can't lose our sense of humor. We can't lose our joy in one another and our hope that we give one another. You know, so to me, and just to take care of ourselves, you know, doing something for pleasure is still okay. We don't have to be in a chronic state of heaviness and anxiety, you know, and we have to provide that for one another, and you know, we have to feed one another. That's the lesson of the gospel, isn't it? So, yeah.
Today in our session coming up, we're going to be talking about young people in the church. You've written a lot about that.
Yeah.
You've worked hard to understand what the millennials are different than us, and I guess I want to include yourself in the Gen X
Just about
group.
there, yeah.
All right. Is there a sense that there's a way to make the church more meaningful to people of middle age? younger?
I think there is, and I think it's showing the sacrament of everyday life, showing young people that even now, if we're going to start mobilizing and organizing, that's sacramental. That is all. Activism is a work of sacrament. I think what young people want, young people are very inclined to do the works of social justice. Yes. We need to tell them that's also a spiritual discipline, that there's not a division, right, between social activism and spiritual practice, that they can all be acts of the sacred, because what we're honoring in one is the holy within all of us.
One of the things that drew many of us to Call to Action over the years is that the Catholic Church should be a leader for justice. Yeah. The Catholic Church is that tradition in our lives, and we have to have hope that through Call to Action we can move the Church in that positive direction.
Well, that's right, and we have to keep that pressure up, you know. There hasn't been a Francis effect in the parishes. People love what the Pope is saying or what he's doing, his acts of mercy, but it's not bringing anyone back into the pews. And that has to do with because it's still an exclusive place. You know, it's still a fractured, broken place. So we have to continue that work, and I think we should see the ties between what the misogyny we're seeing in our society and our political system and the misogyny in the church, the anti-LGBTQ sentiments. I mean, the truth of the matter is the majority of white Catholics and white evangelicals voted for Trump. We have to not be afraid to look at those ties between those ideologies.
And challenge them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jamie. We're so pleased to have you here with us.
I'm always happy to be here. It's really a joy.
Thanks,
and always good to see you. Thanks, Bob.
Take care.
My pleasure.
We're delighted that you're with us again this morning. We're just a few minutes away from the plenary session, which is a panel of young people to talk about the church and their future. I'll keep quiet for a moment here, and you can watch the crowd as it develops. And I'll be back in a few minutes with Jen Reyes-Lay, one of our leaders from St. Louis, who's working with the 2030 generation. Can you talk about this panel that's coming up?
Oh, I don't really know.
Okay.
No, I don't know that much.
Talk about it. Okay. Hi there. We're back. I'm with Jen Reyes-Lay from St. Louis. You represent the ecumenical Catholic community, it says.
Yes.
You're involved in that in St. Louis.
Yes, so I'm the administrator for the National Office for the Ecumenical Catholic Communion that has a table here. We did a liturgy this morning. We'll have some caucus time for people to learn about the model of Catholicism that we're living into within the Ecumenical Catholic Communion.
And Ecumenical Catholic Communion has numerous communities around the country, do they?
Yes, you can look up more information if you're looking for a community near you on our website, which is just catholiccommunion.com. Or I think it's .org. I'm sorry, catholiccommunion.org. And yeah, we have about 50 communities or so scattered around the United States.
This weekend, you've been working especially with the 2030 initiative of Call to Action. What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, so within the 2030s, I think we've built space around community building. One of the things we realize is that in most of our local communities, whether it's a parish or an intentional Eucharistic community or a faith-based community, that there aren't a lot of young adults. And so one of the great things about this conference is it gives us a chance to come together with other people who are in our age range, who are kind of grappling with the same questions and ideas. And so it's just been a really nice space of community building to get to know one another, to build stronger relationships, and to think about, what is it that we're interested in? How are we living the church in the world? And where is it that we find community? And I think that's one of the things, I kind of overheard a little bit of what they were planning for the panel today. And I think that's one of the things they're going to get into is where are young adults finding community? If it's not in a traditional parish or church setting, where is it that we're finding community and spiritual nourishment in our faith?
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're delighted to have you here. You've been to conference before, and we appreciate your coming out and helping out with the 2030 this weekend. You're also a member of our anti-racism team. Talk about that a minute.
Yes, so I'm very proud of Call to Action for the efforts they have been taking surrounding anti-racism and anti-oppression. I've been a member of the anti-racism team for 2 years now, and part of the work that we're doing is to build an action into conference that's in solidarity with the local community where we are. So Call to Action's vision isn't just we come into a city, we drop in, we leave, and that's it. But we really want to know what's going on here. Who are the, kind of movers and shakers in the local community? Who can we partner with to work for justice? And so here in Albuquerque, we've partnered with Strong Families New Mexico. And actually right after this presentation, we're going to have a direct action out on the streets in partnership with Strong Families to stand together as a community united for mercy and justice. So that's one of the ways that the anti-racism team contributes to the Call to Action conferences is helping to build these relationships and to create an action that people can engage in at conference.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Jen. We appreciate you being here.
Take
you.
Care. Enjoy.
Thanks. So again, people are ready to start. Thanks very much. Enjoy.
Now the light's on. Hello, we'd like to get started, please, if you could all have your seats. We do have a few announcements to make. And so everybody can hear the announcements. We'd really appreciate it if you could please take your seats. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a good day so far. All right, here we go with the Saturday announcements, not the Sunday announcements, right? Just wanted to remind you about our procession at 1 o'clock, a call to mercy and justice. Please meet out at the Louisiana Street parking lot over here, I think. And there's a table in the back with materials to make signs. So as you leave, you want to grab something to make a sign, that would be great. We'd appreciate that. We also want to make sure you remember that we have a great performance tonight. It's called Heralds of Hope in Story and Song by Maya Cooper and Paul McComas. They are returning from last year. Everybody really enjoyed their show last year. This will be a completely new show. It starts at 8:30. It will go to 9:15. And their purpose is to instill and share hope in the holidays and always. And I think we all need some hope right now. So I hope you'll all go to the performance tonight. Just want to remind you, too, some people didn't know that there are more exhibitors. If you go out the back door and go that way and around the corner, there are more exhibitors down there. And there's also a bookstore on the other side in the Carlsbad room. Breakout session D, one of the sessions is canceled, but we have a replacement. The one that's canceled is The Nuns Are All Right by Kaya Oakes. Unfortunately, Kaya is ill and was not able to make it. The bookstore wanted me to mention that they still have copies, many copies of her book, however. So even if the session is canceled, you can buy her book. The replacement is going to be art in the political arena. So if you're interested in that, that will be in the room that Kaya was going to speak in, and that's Salon E and F, and that's session D. So art in the political arena. Also, it came to our attention this morning that we didn't have all of the caucuses listed for the rooms that they're going to be in. So they are going to be on the board. They're rolling there. We have sheets out on the membership table to give the room numbers, and I'm going to go through them really, really quickly right here. If you've got your program on page 9, it lists the caucuses. There is one 115 caucus not mentioned. It's on Palestine. Excuse me. And that room is listed on your room sheet. However, the 5 o'clock caucuses, Fortunate Families will be in Salon EF. Intentional Eucharistic Communities will also be in room EF. These are big rooms, so they'll be able to have 2 caucuses in a room. We had more caucuses than we have rooms. So, Building an Inclusive Catholic Church through the Ecumenical Catholic Communion will be in AD. The Anti-Racism Team, Why Anti-Racism in Call to Action, is also in EF. Short-Term Mission to Be a Blessing will be in Salon GJ. Catholic Organizations for Renewal, A Church for Our Daughters, will also be in GJ. Invest Your Money Wisely, Where Your Values Are, will be in AD. And as I said, there's also sheets out on the membership table if you need to look at those. We have one additional caucus, and that will be in the Santa Fe room, which is the prayer room right over here. And it will be a conversation, post-election CTA response and statement. So thank you very much. I would like now to introduce one of our, I'm sorry. That will be, I'm sorry, that's another caucus at 5 o'clock. I'm sorry. Post-election response will be at 5 o'clock in the Santa Fe room over here. I'd now like to introduce John Fremmel, one of our Vision Council members. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It is still morning, right? I'm so happy that you could all join us here in beautiful Albuquerque. My name is John Fremmel. I'm a member of the 2030 community and one of the newest members of the Vision Council. I'm still getting to know many of you because I'm actually fairly new to Call to Action as an organization as well. This is only my 3rd conference, my first being in 2014 in Memphis. I do have one other quick announcement to add briefly as well. In our continual commitment to be an inclusive and anti-oppression organization, we have asked the hotel to designate one of the restrooms on the main level as gender neutral. Yesterday, we heard Jim Fitzgerald and Richard Rohr both discuss how valuable relationships are. This community, all of us gathered here today, would not have come this far if not for the people who have built it up over the years. And some of the most valuable ideas and actions have come from our community of young adults. More than a decade ago, CTA staff responded to the call for dedicated young adult programming by creating retreats and opportunities for justice action, specifically for those of us in our 20s and 30s. The 2030 community has since evolved into a CTA leadership group in its own right, creating programming, direct actions, pilgrimages, and opportunities for intergenerational action and dialogue at conference and in local communities. I was first introduced to Call to Action when an invitation was extended to me to attend a 2030 retreat in Boston in 2014. I somewhat reluctantly decided to go, not quite knowing what I was getting myself into, but I came home from Boston completely transformed. You should know that I'm actually a cradle Catholic. I went to Catholic schools since first grade, and I received an outstanding high school education from the Dominican Sisters in Springfield, Illinois. But when I know we've got a lot of OPs representing today, so that's great. But when I was finally honest with myself about who I am, and I decided to come out as a gay man, my relationship with the Catholic Church took a turn for the worst. I became one of those nuns that we're hearing so much about, N-O-N-E-S, and I decided not to identify with any religion. Although I may have secretly still prayed the Hail Mary whenever I was feeling scared or sad or anxious about something. So privately, perhaps I held on to my faith, but publicly I told people that I had no faith. To me, the Catholic Church as an institution had become something that represented condemnation and exclusion. And as a young gay man, there was a deep and profound sense of hurt and pain that I associated with the Catholic Church. I even refused to go to Christmas Eve Mass with my mom because I was embarrassed to be seen anywhere near a Catholic church. Many of you, I can imagine, relate to this feeling of pain or even embarrassment when thinking about the institutional church. Many of you have felt excluded due to a disability. Maybe you've been hurt by the systemic racism that pervades the church. Maybe your gifts that you bring to the table have not been validated because of your gender or because of who you love. Maybe you have been fired from a paid or a volunteer position in a Catholic institution for following your conscience. Maybe you've been denied communion, or maybe someone you love has experienced these things. When I went to Boston for this 2030 retreat, I met other people like me. Each of us came from very different places with very different experiences, but we held one thing in common. For some reason, even though this church as an institution had become something that was alienating, something that actually hurt us, if we were all being honest with ourselves as 20, 30 young adult people, we were still Catholic. What does that mean? What does it mean to be Catholic? This is the gift that Call to Action gave to me. The understanding that to be Catholic is to be authentic and true to oneself. The church does not belong to the bishops who spread hate. We all know this. The church does not exist only in a building. And the church does not rely on outdated and inaccurate understandings of love and gender. No. The church is so much more than this. We are the church, and we are the ones who must live the gospel call to mercy and justice. And this new understanding of at least new understanding for me, of what it means to be Catholic, saved my faith, and I owe it to the 2030 community at Call to Action. Now, today's panel and similar ones at past conferences are the direct result of the creativity and efforts of CTA 2030. So before we get started, I want to ask you to consider making a gift right now by visiting cta-usa.org. If you don't have a smartphone, you can visit the CTA information booth to make your donation when you leave this room. Or I think there are even envelopes that may be being passed around at some point. You can also become a monthly donor starting at just $5 a month, a cup of coffee. Although we always appreciate more, of course. But your financial support will help enable CTA 2030 to build up our community, sustain it, and to reach more young Catholics like me. So while you all take care of the donation part right now, I'd like to introduce our next session. Unfortunately, as you just heard, our keynote speaker scheduled for this time, Kaya Oakes, was unable to be here due to an illness, but standing in her place today, facilitating today's conversation, is Rhonda Miska. Rhonda is a millennial Catholic, a member of the 2030 community, a Wisconsin native, and a candidate with the Sinsinawa Dominican Sisters. She's a freelance religion writer whose work has appeared in America Magazine, U.S. Catholic Magazine, Global Sisters Report, and the book Catholic Women Speak, Bringing Our Gifts to the Table, published by Paulus Press last year. I think I need to get an autograph on mine. So. She teaches in religious studies at Clark University in Dubuque, Iowa, and works as a Spanish interpreter with Central American migrant children in legal proceedings. Her past ministries include facilitating Muslim-Christian dialogue, leading retreats, coordinating a community with adults with disabilities, serving as a Jesuit volunteer in Nicaragua, and working in Hispanic ministry and social justice ministry at a Catholic parish. She serves on the advisory board of Catholic Women Preach and is a member of the Spiritual Director International's New Contemplative Initiative. Rhonda holds a master's degree from the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry and works with the Spanish-speaking community at St. Patrick's in Dubuque. A member of the Order of Preachers, she's passionate about proclaiming the gospel, building inclusive and intergenerational community, and seeking continual conversion through a praxis of prayer and social action. So I'm very honored to welcome here my friend Rhonda Miska.
Thank you, John. And thanks to all of you here for joining us for this panel. As others have said, I know Kaya Oaks is sorry to not be here. I encourage you to read her bio and check out her books. As you've heard, they're available in the bookstore here. And I'm honored to stand in for her today as the moderator of this panel. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists and then dive into a conversation around identity and belief and belonging and community and building intergenerational community. So first, to my right, is Dania Snyder, PhD. She's a Roman Catholic woman priest who serves in the Central Valley of California and the San Francisco Bay Area. Her ministries include serving the New Spirit Rising faith community in Fresno, providing religious education, working with homeless veterans dually diagnosed with mental health needs and substance abuse issues, as well as with teens and young adults experiencing the onset of schizophrenia. She has a deep passion for social justice, which includes advocating for women's rights and leadership across all faiths, access to appropriate mental health services, and LGBTQ rights. Dania also currently serves as Vice President of the Pacific Region for the Federation of Christian Ministries. Next is Joe Cruz, a founding member of Rye House, the Minneapolis Catholic worker community, and he grew up in Place of Grace Catholic Worker in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where he was influenced by the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration there. He invests his time and energy into organizing for environmental justice against frac sand mining, leading discussions about white privilege and structural racism. And Joe, over the summer, recently represented Call to Action at the 2016 Asian Theological Forum Asian Youth Academy in Thailand. And finally, we have John Noble, who lives in Des Moines, Iowa. He was one of the young adults that Kaya Oaks wrote about in her book, The Nuns Are All Right, N-O-N-E-S. So John is a senior at Drake University studying religion and rhetoric, media and social change with a concentration in women and gender studies. He's served as director at large of Roman Catholic Women Priests USA and as an organizer with a Fight for 15 to raise the minimum wage, as a pastoral assistant for Downtown Disciples, a church in Des Moines, and at the Des Moines Catholic Worker. He presented a workshop this morning on disability, and he's passionate about the intersections of liberation theologies, sexuality, and embodiment. So what a rich group of experiences gathered before us with these three individuals. So I will be inviting some introductions and conversation among the three of them. We will wrap up by 12:45. We won't be taking questions from the floor, but all of us will be around for the rest of the weekend, and hopefully we all want the conversations to continue and move forward. So as Father Richard Rohr reminded us last night, it's all about relationship. And our very image of God as Trinity is this image of communion and loving relationship. And as David Saavedra reminded us, the work of initiating, building, and sustaining relationship, especially across lines of difference, including age, race, socioeconomic or education level, sexual orientation, or any other identity marker, requires courage from all of us. We are in conversation today because we want to do the difficult, demanding, but necessary and vital work of building community at Call to Action across the generational divide. And we want true, authentic community, not something simply superficial. And of course, given the recent events this week, our way of engaging with each other and building community and loving and listening deeply to each other across difference is a crucial, crucial witness that we can offer our nation at this time. For me personally, this is work that's close to my heart as a member of the 2030 group, as a young woman in religious life, when the majority of Catholic sisters in the US are older than my parents, and as a young woman ministry professional. Kaya Oakes did share some of her remarks with me, and in her research and polling of younger Catholics, she learned that younger Catholics are overwhelmingly interested in building up multi-generational, ethnically diverse, and socially conscious communities. And in her notes, she wrote that some of the younger Catholics she spoke with expressed frustration when they attend a gathering and are asked where the other young Catholics are and if they will bring a friend next time, claiming it is isolating, and memorably says that building the body of Christ is about more than putting butts in seats. So with that framing from Kaya, I would like to begin our conversation with each of our panelists here. I want to invite each of you to speak about your Catholic identity, the tensions of that identity, and your search for community. And in Kaya's book, The Nuns Are All Right, she speaks of how millennial progressive Catholics may feel marginalized or like they don't fit in some typical Catholic parishes, but often seek out and cobble together in sort of a do-it-yourself sort of way various forms of community, including online forums, a typical Catholic parish, a non-Catholic gathering, or other settings. So to each of our panelists, and I'll ask Dania to start us off, tell us about your identity as a Catholic, the various communities you are or have been a part of that have nurtured your Catholic identity, and other elements of who you are.
Well, I do want to first express my absolute gratitude for being invited to be part of this panel. What I want to share with you today about my sense of identity is that I myself, I am a cradle Catholic. I never really heard that terminology until I became much older, so I thought, okay, I'm cradle Catholic. But when I hear the term cradle Catholic, it means so many different things to so many different people. And part of my lifelong identity, building of my identity, has really been trying to understand the context of the language that has been used as I have grown up versus how I have been embraced or not embraced. And so I've learned that language, it must match the expression of my living. And with that, it didn't always necessarily meet what the traditional hierarchical church had to offer. When I encounter youth, and when I say youth, I mean a broad span of individuals from very, very wee ones, the wee ones, to individuals into their 20s and 30s. And in all truth, going into the 40s, I teach psychology at a state university, and developmentally, yeah, it's still, we're on the cusp of still being identified as kind of in young adulthood. But what I've learned is that for the most part, my identity is filtered. It's filtered because I'm a female. It's filtered because I'm a person of color. So what I've learned is when I hear language that resonates with me, that identifies me as my lived expression, that's where I'll gravitate to. I've also learned that I'm really good at showing two sides. The private life of mine, which is where I feel safe and I can connect with others that use that kind of language, or at least are willing are willing, and that's the big one, willing to engage and try and engage that type of language with me. Or I can go very public and I can toe what we say the party line. And so oftentimes when I have gone to the traditional hierarchical Catholic Church and I don't hear the flexibility in the language, I just go very public. I'll smile and I'll nod. And so when you see a smiling and nodding youth, that's a flag. That's a flag. I'm just heads up. Don't hate me out there. Don't hate me. I'm not giving us up. So I listen to the dialogue. I'm very good at one-on-one. So if you have a youth and they're able to meet with you one-on-one, I think there's a willingness to go deeper into dialogue. And when I hear the language that's expressed, that allows me to express the way I live, then I'll open up. So how I find my identity, how I find connection really starts with the one-on-one. Then the next one is from the one-on-one, who meets where? If I hear, wow, we really resonate, I really hear you speaking my language, where do you go to get nourished? Where do you go to get fulfilled? Sometimes it's just at the local Starbucks. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't do the one-on-one. So from there, it's a building up. And literally, that's literally how I found one community after the next, after the next, after the next. It's that one-on-one connection that can be made. I learned about Roman Catholic women priests from seeking out a spiritual director who really was willing to utilize the language in which I identify with. And that person was actually able to share with me in my sense of sorrow and dismay about what I felt called to and who I am. She listened and she shared that she heard about this movement. And my whole life was changed. If there was a moment of conversion, it was that, because it really allowed me to finally start shedding that public skin that I have worked so hard to callous up and to keep very tight. And so from there, I learned that yes, my Catholic identity that I questioned, that I doubted, that I'm a dissenter, it all means that I'm a seeker. And that's a good thing. And that meant everything to me. So as a seeker, I dissent and I doubt. And that's a good thing, something to be embraced. And so I'll leave you with, because of my connection with Roman Catholic women priests, I've been able to reach out and be the one-on-one with other individuals and build my smaller communities in that respect because of the freedom to be myself.
Thank you. Thank you, Dania, for your heartfelt words. Joe, if you'd like to speak to the question of community and identity and belonging and how these threads fit together for you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, it's a big honor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my association with an identity as a Catholic person, and then also my relationship to the Catholic worker movement. So although I continue to claim a Catholic identity, being associated with the church has often been really hard. Pretty big understatement. In my archdiocese of Minneapolis and St. Paul, where the child abuse crisis justifiably destroyed much trust in the church, and the legacy of Archbishop Neinstedt's crusade against marriage equality has cut deep wounds, the association is painful for many. There have been times where my identification with the church immediately triggers people's pain and disgust of an institution they view as irreformable. I remember during a work meeting at the Racial and Economic Justice nonprofit where I'm employed, a coworker proposed the idea of organizing local Catholic hierarchy to push for prison reform in our state. Another coworker's reaction was immediate and visceral. She said, "Gross, don't even talk about the Catholic Church." Unfortunately and undeniably, the public face of the church in my town over the past 10 years has tragically merited such a reaction. Perhaps most painful in recent memory was a meeting I was a part of with our auxiliary bishop last spring. I'm a member of a small group called Catholics for Racial Justice that is organizing both lay Catholics and the church hierarchy to more courageously work against racism in the church and in the Twin Cities. Last April, 3 of us met with the auxiliary bishop to talk about the Archdiocese's lack of response to the murder of Jamar Clark. Last fall, almost a year ago this week, Jamar Clark, a 23-year-old unarmed black man from North Minneapolis, was shot and killed by the police. When the bullet entered his head, he was lying on the ground. Our city erupted in protest in the wake of yet another murder of an unarmed black man by the police. The protest led to an 18-day occupation of the streets surrounding the 4th Police Precinct in North Minneapolis, near where Jamar was killed. We hope to communicate to the bishop our brokenheartedness over the lack of support and response from the church. During the occupation and weeks of protest, many religious institutions showed up powerfully and en masse. But outside of several women religious groups who always and forever seem to be showing up when it's important, and a few Jesuit novitiates, it's true. Outside of those groups, the Catholic presence and interaction with the protest was minimal. In the midst of our meeting with the bishop, an Eritrean American woman who was a member of our group tried to convey what it was like to be black in his diocese. She broke down describing the overt racism in the church. She explained to the bishop that she wonders how a church so ingrained in her cultural heritage, her sense of family and sense of self, could seemingly hate her so much. In response to her vulnerability and our call for support, the bishop explained that while he wants to help, he simply doesn't know how. He just didn't understand how his voice could possibly make a difference. This is a true story. As you can imagine, we were shocked. Our city had literally turned upside down over the past 6 months. The calls for action and participation in demanding justice for Jamar had been endless since November. How could a bishop embedded in the Christian tradition that pioneered liberation theology and the concept of God's preferential option for the poor, serving an archdiocese that produced one of the most powerful church documents on racial justice, feel useless in the face of such crucifixion? It was painfully clear to us how disconnected the bishop was, how isolated he was from the bleeding heart of Christ in our midst. It became clear that racism and white supremacy were so deeply embedded in our church that its local leaders, in the face of a racial justice movement similar in scope and importance to the civil rights movement, had lost their voice. I should also mention here that 52%, exit polling showed that 52% of voting Catholics voted for Trump. So when we talk about systemic racism in the church, this week is a visceral reminder of that. This is just one story of how the Catholic Church has broke my heart. You all, I'm sure, have stories like this too. This experience begs the question, which I ask myself almost daily, why in the face of such despair do I continue to identify as Catholic? Is there enough that is beautiful and good to keep me here? Can I find God in this messy and broken collage of believers? A large part of the answer to this question is, I don't really know. But most days I feel like more or less I don't have a choice. Catholicism, for better or for worse, is so ingrained in my lived reality that I can't imagine a life without it. So many of my deepest, most sacred memories are stitched with images of crucifixes, the smell of incense, and the community my family built around church. I am marked, bearing a sacramental character that flows from my baptism and through my veins. And while a wounded church continues to blunder, it also mysteriously and paradoxically heals and restores. It somehow provides me with the grounding to leap into unknown but ultimately liberatory spaces. In my remaining time, I'll briefly discuss the Catholic worker, a manifestation of the church that heals me, that reveals to me God's endless love. This source of hope is located partially, if not totally, outside of what we think of as the Catholic Church. It is often situated on the margin, calling the church back home. The hope of the Catholic worker movement, in the words of the movement's co-founder, Peter Morin, is to blow the dynamite of the church. Started by Dorothy Day and Peter in the 1930s, the Catholic worker is now a global network of autonomous communities dedicated to living out the works of mercy, resisting racism, militarism, and materialism. The Catholic worker attempts to literally embody Christ's core teaching, to become a sacrament signifying Jesus' radical economic and social vision. The practice of daily hospitality to those siphoned to the periphery of our mainstream capitalist culture provides the spiritual foundation for our larger structural critiques, and it fuels a praxis of direct action that attempts to better expose the sources of oppression. Dorothy Day was not the founder of a charitable organization. She envisioned a movement that prophetically called attention to our acceptance of a filthy, rotten system. In Dorothy's spirit, the Catholic worker today remains an anarchist revolutionary organization rooted in love that does not stand down, that squarely names oppression, its propagators, and sources. Today, the movement is increasingly not Catholic or Christian, which I believe has only strengthened and broadened its wisdom. Additionally, the Catholic worker, especially in the Midwest, is in the process of naming and challenging the ways in which the networks of oppression we hope to work against follow us into our homes and become embedded in our hospitality houses and community structures. This self-reflection leads to questions around why a vast majority of Catholic workers are white and come from class-comfortable backgrounds, and why charismatic men so often represent the voice of particular communities. And how do we participate in hospitality without replicating the hierarchy of power differentiation that exists in conventional homeless shelters? The Catholic worker is in the midst of this rebirth. It is building off a powerful tradition, continuously adapting and reaching toward the kingdom of God. When I was 8, my parents started a Catholic worker with a group of their friends in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I have lived in the Minneapolis Catholic worker for the past 5 years. The Catholic worker is so deeply ingrained in my identity and woven so closely together with my understanding of my Catholicism, I cannot envision a worldview without it. The Catholic worker dares me to claim Catholicism. It is a daily reminder of the scandal of Jesus' earthly life. It is a reflection of what Johann Baptist Metz calls the dangerous memory, which is the cold, hard fact that Jesus was tortured and killed for consistently demanding loving justice and a new economic and social order in the face of a militarized empire. Not unlike Malcolm X or Oscar Romero or Berta Cáceres or the indigenous water protectors under military occupation at Standing Rock. In the light of this reality, the call to Christianity is seemingly insurmountable. How can I possibly be a Christian when the founder of my religion consistently instructed his followers to own nothing unless it was owned communally? Like literally nothing. How can I be Christian when the founder of my religion was murdered for his spiritual and political witness? I don't know the answer to these questions, but the daily reality of the Catholic worker points me in the right direction. And it places me in a compassionate community of loving support that consoles me in my inevitable and perhaps sacred weakness. The Catholic worker reveals to me the dynamite of my faith is liberatory potential and the ways in which being Catholic fosters a revolution of the heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for your heartfelt and honest words about your struggles, and especially what you spoke about, the desire to heal and to restore and to become a sacrament. Finally, John, I'd like to invite you to share some of your reflections on belonging and identity and the building and sustaining of community in those identities.
Well, I'm a little sorry I have to follow these two because they were amazing. Oh my gosh. So a lot of my experience with Catholicism centers a little bit ironically around groups that Dania and Joe are both a part of. So I am on the board circle for Roman Catholic women priests, and I served last summer as a Catholic worker. Another important part of who I am and the way that I do Catholicism deals with the fact that I am actually employed, work at, and largely worship at a Disciples of Christ church in Des Moines, Iowa. That's a really important thing for me to name here because I think what we want to talk about here is the difference when we're talking about inside and outside. And I think CTA is a community that has tried to maybe trouble some of those binaries, but I think we have a lot of room to go when it comes to talking about inside and outside. I particularly think that millennials, although I hate that word because it's usually like with a shaken fist, it's like, millennials. I think that we have troubled a lot of binaries about inside and outside, and I think that's crucial to name. So the fact that I can identify myself as a Catholic and worship and work at a Disciples of Christ church is essential to me. To say that I am a Catholic. I am a fully LGBTQ affirming, women's ordination supporting, Black Lives Matter proclaiming Catholic. And let me tell you, and I think the fact of that matter is we're very comfortable with talking about how that means. When I say things like that, people are like, oh, of course you can still be those things and be Catholic. But I still think we have a long way to go, because I think there's a lot of tension intergenerationally when I say things like to some people, when I say, oh, well, I go to a Disciples of Christ church, or I haven't been to Mass in a hot second. So there's a lot of tension there, because there is this conversation that we have about staying on the inside and making change from the inside. And I want to honor that, and I want to honor those who do that. And I also want to acknowledge that there are people who have walked away for an absolutely good reason. And that people who can't say that they are Catholic for very good reasons, we don't get to pull them back in to our inside. People who have walked away from our movements and from our institutions, and I mean our institutions, because of our lack of inclusion, because of our lack of reaching out to people, and they walk away to our outside, we don't get to bring them back in to our inside. We can try to do better. And ultimately, I think we need to understand that we need to trouble this binary between inside and outside, that you can go to a Protestant church and be a Catholic, that you can not go to Mass and be a Catholic, that you can do anything and be a Catholic. And I think there's a lot of issues with the way that we talk about Catholic identity on the inside and on the outside. I think one of the ways that we do this on the Catholic left is something that we say is, we like to talk about, oh, well, when we hear racial injustice coming from the hierarchy, how many of you has ever used the phrase, and I'm going to raise my hand here too, oh, they're not a real Catholic? I've used it. I'll say I've used it. And I think that's a dangerous phrase. Not because we stop prophetically witnessing against injustice, but when we get to say that oppression is not, quote unquote, really Catholic, then we separate ourselves from that. And we're the real Catholics, and we don't have to deal with the fact that there are insidious forms of oppression that have crept into and live in the structure of our church. So we have to name the fact that our fight against white supremacy is authentically Catholic, but white supremacy lives in the authentically Catholic, whatever that means, church. We get to name our fight against patriarchy as authentically Catholic, and we get to name that in the institutional church, in our movements, in Catholic workers, in everywhere, patriarchy lives there too. And we don't get to name that as not really us. We have to deal with all kinds of messiness. We have to deal with troubling the binaries of the inside and the outside. And I think we're one of the best movements to do that, because we have such a commitment to flipping the inside and the outside and to getting rid of that. This should be one of our first priorities, is to do this, because we have talked so much about a commitment of ending an inside and an outside. And I think that means that we get to trouble the waters again. I like that phrase. Troubling the waters of what it means to be authentically Catholic. When we hear folks say, women church communities, they're not really Catholic. Independent Catholic communities, they're not really Catholic. Certain cultural forms of expression, well, that's not really Catholic. We have to start thinking way more critically about what is really Catholic, because there are a million things in our nation, in our world, that are really Catholic. And they are good, bad, and ugly. And I think that when we start recognizing that Catholicism is diverse and has a lot of things that we need to grapple with, that's where we can begin a conversation intergenerationally about dealing with the inside, dealing with the outside. And just in closing, I'll briefly say that I think one of the best things that our generation can bring to this conversation is the fact that we really hate binaries. We really hate binaries. We're recognizing gender as not even just a spectrum, just a big old friggin' mess. We're recognizing sexual orientation as far more complex than we could ever realize. So when we start thinking outside of binaries and we start thinking creatively about what church can be and the hard things we have to do, that's where our generation has a lot to say. So.
So Dania, Joe, and John, thank you, each of you, for sharing so much of your own stories and so much richness there to reflect on as we think about all of our different contexts and our ways of belonging and believing and naming identity and drawing lines. So to move on, I want to focus the next step in our conversation on forming authentic, loving, and effective community across difference, and many differences were named and raised by the three of you, but looking specifically at the intergenerational question and the gifts and the challenges as we bridge the intergenerational divide and seek to have true encounter, one of those words that Pope Francis uses over and over again, encounter, and the challenge to be a church of encounter. I think sometimes it's said in intergenerational groups that older members bring mentoring and experience and younger members bring energy and enthusiasm, but as John spoke about troubling binaries, it's often, that can be an oversimplification, and it doesn't allow us to really break down the various roles that we can play wherever we are on that spectrum. Each of us strives to speak from our own experience and have gifts and wisdom to share, and yet sometimes it seems something can get lost in translation. And I think often what is at play are unconscious assumptions or biases which, if not unrecognized, named, and addressed, can lead to conflict or to disengagement. And as Dania shared, language matters in helping people know where they can truly be and where they can truly bring their full selves. And Joe named our desire to be a people who seek to heal and to restore. And as we think about the deeply fractured political and civil space that we are inhabiting, the work of offering witness of mutual, diverse, healthy community is crucial. And as a Dominican in training, I would say that it is a way of preaching the gospel. How we are with each other is as important as what we say or do publicly. So community is a part of mission. So looking at this question of how we incarnate this right relationship, this mutuality, the communion that Father Rohr spoke of extensively last night, how do we do that across difference? And the question I propose to you, and any of the three of you can start however you feel moved, speaking from the perspective of as a younger Catholic, what is something that an older Catholic has done or said that has been helpful or not, and why? Dania will start us off.
So just to begin, and I know I can't speak on behalf of all youth. I think that's really important to always be mindful of when encountering a youth, they are not speaking on behalf of all youth. That's item number one. Mentorship is appreciated. Mentorship is so truly valuable and is seen as valuable in the eyes of the young, because there is wisdom for those who have journeyed farther than where we are at this point in life. When I seek mentorship, I will ask lots of questions. And it's really nice when there is a sense of patience. What I've learned is, in mentorship, what I seek and what I've heard. There's a difference when I'm looking at mentorship. There's a difference between wisdom and advice. Your wisdom, when I speak to my elders, your wisdom will draw me in. Your wisdom tells me what you've learned from your experiences. Your advice comes from your personal experience of what worked for you. You. And oftentimes, the person, the youth that you're looking at, you can tell, did they walk the same walk? Did they have the same shoes? And in all truth, I can say I've never had a mentor who is a woman of color outside of one amazing woman that I met right before she passed on from this life. It's interesting because when I ask questions, I'm asked a few things that don't always rub me the right way. It's because it kind of grates against one of the filters that I have to live through, and that is my gender, and that is the sense of putting me in a role by asking, are you married? Sometimes individuals have recognized that that's maybe not the best opener. So there is wisdom in learning from that. However, some default to, do you have children? And it's interesting because if I'm next to someone who is relatively young and not female, they will ask, are you in school? It still happens. It's a knee-jerk reaction. One, we're socialized in that way as Catholics. In the 20s and the 30s, there aren't many people in the pews around that age range. And it's not because they're out having children, it's because there's that sense of that's where people think I need to be in that role. And it's interesting, when I watch the facial expressions of those that I share, no, I'm not married, and no, I don't have children, they look at me with one of two expressions like, oh, you poor thing. Or I've actually had individuals actually show me that more of that serious concern, you're not married, you don't have children. So I think the default socialization of our Catholicism is something to please be mindful of in recognizing that there is so much more to an individual. We are very dynamic, especially when we're looking at youth, that there has been that sense of marginalization, there has been a sense of rejection, there has been a sense of oppression. And so just remembering that initial socialized way of connecting is not the best way to start off the conversation. Perhaps developing a dialogue of, so tell me where you're at in your life right now. Ooh, you have my attention. Let's talk. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dania, for those ideas of opening conversation and what invites engagement and what doesn't. So, John or Joe, if you'd like to continue the conversation here.
I think one of the hardest phrases I've heard that's always off-putting to me is, oh, well, you'll be back. So the fact that I am at a disciples church now, and I hear, oh, well, you'll be back. You'll find a parish. You'll find a good left-leaning parish. You'll find a good progressive parish, and you'll settle in. And that is so hard for me to hear. I understand that it comes from a positive place, but there's a reason that I'm at my faith community, and it's because they're taking stances on issues that I can't find a single parish close to me. Gas costs a lot of money, you guys, that I could get to that is taking a stance on these issues. And I think that's true across generationally. And one thing that I would say is stop trying to bring us to church and try to bring the church to us. Because that's what's so disappointing to me is that there's always oh, well, if we just do blank, 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 then we'll get young people, or let's have a big study, or let's read a lot of research, or let's do these things. And I'm like, you guys do know there's like a college like down the street from where you are. Like, have you ever considered just like going and hanging out with them? So I think there's a lot of, bring a little Pope Francis into here, there's a lot of culture of encounter that has to go on here, where we need folks to come to us. And I will say, I think that means for our generation, we need to reflect that encounter too. And we need to do that as well. I think one of the most powerful things that I've ever had happen to me across intergenerational lines was with a friend of mine who is the pastor that I currently work for, who sat me down and said, "What do you need from this church? What do you need from us and what we're doing?" And I think that question, which we can ask across generational lines as well, I think young people can ask older people, what do you need? I think starting from that place of asking a genuine question and, like Dania said, not assuming that the answer to that question is true for all young people. Because I think sometimes I've been like, oh, I'd really like this in a faith community. And then someone leading the faith community will be like, neat, great, every 21-year-old really wants that. And I'm like, So I think it has to start with coming to us coming to you, and asking a question, and then acting on the answer to that question.
If you'd like to add your input there as well, or I'm happy to share one quick anecdote out of my experience of something that was very helpful when I made the announcement in the spring that I had been accepted for candidacy as a Dominican sister. I had a sister not in my congregation, in a different congregation, who said congratulations and gave me a hug, and then she said, "Your experience is so different than mine." I've just found that so helpful in recognizing that as someone entering at the age of 35 in 2016, the only person entering in my year, that it was not the same as for those who made this choice when they were 18 or 19 years old in the 1950s or early 1960s. And so just that she could share my joy and also be able to name that your experience has been so far different from mine and will be different from mine, and I will celebrate with you with that acknowledgement was one encounter for me that was very positive and has stuck with me. So if you'd like to speak to this as well.
Yep, just briefly, so I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, of course, but so I don't want to say this is like applicable to all older folks and all younger folks, but I go to a church that kind of generally reflects the demographics of this room, and it's a great thing. It's a great thing, and the community, the Catholic worker I'm a part of, we're all like really almost the exact same age. We're like all 27, 28, 29. So there's this tendency I have found with quite a few of the folks at my church where like myself and our community are the like radical embodiment or wing of the church. It was like, because you're young, because you don't have a career, because you don't have kids, you can go do that stuff. And we're here doing the adult things, and you can go be, wild and crazy, and tell us about it. And we'll even support you financially, which of course we really appreciate. But I think the thing that I find myself wanting is I want to do that stuff with you. I want to go to a protest and get arrested with you, and I want to be in community with you. And I think that is I think that is something that I'm finding I need more, and a way in which I think the wisdom that both of us have to share can be transferred to each other. So that's a thing that I think is hard. And then a thing that has been really helpful is we have a community meal every week, just an open meal. And there's a older guy who is a monk at Gethsemane for a few years, and he left and is married now, but he goes to church with me, and he just comes consistently. And he doesn't he just is there, and he's there to listen and hang out, and he's kind of become a part of our community. So I think on the flip side, it's that's an example of, I think, what I'm wanting.
So thank you, each of you, for your thoughtful responses, and for those of us at the table and in the room who identify as younger folks, perhaps something we can think about is to flip the question, which is what is something that we have said or done that has been helpful or not in, as John said, going out to create this culture of encounter across difference. So I think it's important to have these conversations, even when sometimes it might cause a little bit of uncomfortable laughter. And regardless of wherever we stand on a generational spectrum, it's healthy to practice this self-reflection and try to become aware of assumptions that might be in play, ways we've been socialized to be. And it requires continual conversion. John spoke earlier about kind of the messiness of it, and not pointing fingers out there at things that need to change out there, but to recognize that on all these different levels, this hard work of continual conversion and constant self-reflection and growth has to be going on, guided, we hope and pray, by God's Spirit moving towards this vision of the kingdom. And it requires patience with ourselves and with one another, and an equal ability to speak truth and listen deeply, with a willingness to be curious about where we might be called, as well as to assume that others are acting out of goodwill, which I think is very, very key, to try to maintain enough spaciousness to assume that people are acting out of goodwill even when we don't understand the choices they make. So finally, to close our conversation, I'd like to ask the three of you to reflect on this journey of believing and belonging as progressive Catholics in terms of questions. President-elect of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Terry Maya, was with a gathering of young sisters. Giving Voice is an organization for sisters under the age of 50. And she told the young sisters the questions of the older sisters are not your questions. And of course, it's our questions that drive us. As John said before, the importance of questions. It's our questions that drive us in this kind of praxis of prayer and action. So to kind of deepen our understanding of this engine that moves us forward, I'd like to ask you to share what is a question or two that guides your own discernment of where God is calling you, both as an individual and in community. Whoever would like to begin.
My bad.
They told us we have to share the mics this way, so we're trying to be obedient. It's not really in our nature.
I think the question I've been sitting with for many years, but I think was reiterated in Richard Rohr's talk last night, was that the paradigm shift that he's talking about, right? The way in which he's calling us to view God differently as this kind of continual flow, and getting rid of this hierarchy God that I think most of us, if not all of us, grew up with. How is that going to affect? How does that relate to my life and how I relate to the economy or my community? Like, what is the calling? What is the real kind of application of that kind of worldview? Because I think what it is beyond my wildest imagination. I think it's really beautiful and probably very intense.
So I think one thing when I think about my generation is that we are a generation of action. You could even say we are called to action. So I think the question that guides me, and I think a question that we can ask intergenerationally, is where can I show up for you? And and I'm gonna have to do this right, and where do you show up for me? I hope I did that right. I think that if we were to ask those questions, where can I show up for you, and where can you show up for me? And understanding that we will not always like the answers to those questions. Sometimes I ask questions, even discernment, faith-based questions, and I kind of know what I'd like the answer to that question to be very often. But where can I show up for you? And if that answer is uncomfortable, well, I asked the question. Where can you show up for me? You have to be able to confront that. And I think it means confronting and encountering the fact that the answers to those questions won't always be comfortable intergenerationally, and it often doesn't fit what we want the answer to be, and that's okay, and that's what discernment is, and that's what community is. As an example, I think when we talk about the Catholic workers, sometimes in the Catholic worker movement there's been a split between what does it mean to authentically be a Catholic worker, which often reflects a lot of authentically Catholic. What does it mean to be authentically Catholic questions? Unfortunately, I think sometimes we like to kind of like drag Dorothy Day out of her grave for this one to be like, what would Dorothy say about this? And I don't think those questions are helpful. I think what questions are helpful are what is the Catholic worker movement or Call to Action or RCWP or any of these groups, what are they today? What are you as a young person in this organization? What are you as an older person in this organization? How can I honor that, and how can I show up and be alongside you?
My two questions, I'll start with the first one, naturally. So, just to give some understanding to the word that I'm going to use, the word I'm going to use is prayerful. I was taught by a very wise person that life is a prayer, and live your prayer. And so the question that I often ask myself and that I invite other people in to ask of themselves is this, whatever this moment is this prayerful? Meaning, am I just sitting and talking about ideas? Or am I doing something with those ideas? And if it is prayerful, it is the latter of the two. So I try to live my life as the best prayer I could ever offer. The second question is, am I uncomfortable? And if I'm not uncomfortable, then that's not a good place to be. I always want to invite individuals to live and exist in the intellectual discomfort of the various things that can be talked about regarding faith, religion, spirituality, understanding that their definitions may be vastly different than mine, and to be okay with the discomfort. And then to also, as well as spiritually, be in a place of discomfort. And to be okay with that, because that means that the work is not done. And for me, in essence, that's my identity as a Catholic. The work is not done. So do I live it? And am I still uncomfortable about where I am? And I hope the answer to both is yes.
Thank you again, John and Joe and Dania, for your heartfelt offerings of questions. I'd like to speak as well, from my perspective as another younger Catholic, I have the very great privilege and blessing of teaching undergraduates a course called The Foundations of the Spiritual Life, where we look at Catholic social teaching and spiritual models and spiritual practice and historical Jesus and all kinds of things. And we're in a unit, rather serendipitously, where we're talking about race and reading King and talking about nonviolent struggle and organizing in order to create change. And the question I keep bringing to my students, which I try to bring to myself as well, I say, we see from where we stand. So the first question is, where do I stand? What are my identity markers? And how do those propel me through the world? And how do those create the lenses? I believe you spoke about filters before. So from where I stand, what are those lenses and filters that I see the world through, the world sees me through? And then which moving into the discomfort, how can I stand with another? And we have this beautiful tradition of the preferential option for the poor, and of concern for those who are most marginalized. So understanding deeply, where do I stand, and then how can I stand with another, knowing that Christ is in that encounter of standing with another, and finding the beauty and the dignity in that other person. So thank you again for your reflections this morning into the afternoon. All three of them, and I will be around for the rest of the weekend. So I do encourage you to seek us out, and I pray that our collective continued consideration of these questions of how to build authentic community across difference will bear fruit. And I'd like to close with a poem. We will be done by 12:45. I do find that poetry, this might seem like an unexpected way to close, but I think it can pull us out of sort of our thinking, analytical minds and into a more contemplative and creative space, where maybe we're perhaps a little more receptive to the movement of the Spirit. So this is a poem by Mary Oliver, a contemporary U.S. poet. Many of you may know her work. And I think her words speak powerfully at this particular moment, both about the reverence that we seek to have for one another as we build community, as well as the humility that keeps us open to the unexpected places that God may be guiding us as we seek to incarnate this reflection of our Trinitarian God who is love. So to close, I offer you these words. Mysteries, yes. Truly, we live with mysteries too marvelous to be understood. How grass can be nourishing in the mouths of lambs. How rivers and stones are forever in allegiance with gravity, while we ourselves dream of rising. How two hands touch and the bonds will never be broken. How people come from delight or the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. Let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, look, and laugh in astonishment and bow their heads. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kaya Oaks had left some big shoes to fill, and I think Rhonda did a fantastic job in filling them. And thank you again to the rest of the panel as well for once again revitalizing my faith as a young adult Catholic. I'd like to welcome real briefly Adrienne Barboa to the stage from Strong Family. She's going to speak briefly about the procession coming up at 1 o'clock.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Adrienne Barboa. Bienvenidos a Albuquerque. This is my home state. My family's been here for generations, and I am so happy as a Catholic to see you all here today and have learned about a call to action. Today, as you all know, our families are in this place of what's ahead, right? And we're saying we want to stand out in solidarity, take this procession out into the community as Catholic communities. And, the street here, Louisiana, is lined with is a very busy street. There's 2 malls on both sides, and so having this visible presence in our community that really makes a stance around, we want to call for mercy and justice and love in a time of when so many of our families and communities are facing violence, hate, or bigotry, that we want to stand together as Catholic communities, as leaders across race, class, gender, sexuality, and stand together as a visible presence for the humanity of faith, love, and mercy as y'all's as the theme of this conference, right? One earth, one people. So I thank you again. Today, Strong Families is a network of organizations that works to fight for policies so that all our families can have the rights, resources, and recognition they need to thrive. So we're excited to be this visible presence here in our Albuquerque community, and hope you'll join us at 1 o'clock. We'll be meeting right out the front doors of the hotel. Thank you so much.